Okay, it is 3:30 and we need to move through the rest of the agenda, so let's resume. The next agenda item is, again, committee discussion, and I'm going to use the chair's position to pose a couple of issues that seem critical to me. So others may have a different opinion, but as I reviewed the human evidence of carcinogenicity, it is inadequate overall. And so that means that the strength of evidence in animals and the strength of the mechanistic evidence becomes key in making a decision. And I will just say that the human evidence being inadequate doesn't necessarily mean that BPA doesn't cause cancer in humans, but we have to follow the evidence that we have. And as all the discussants have pointed out, the human evidence, human epidemiologic studies have significant limitations that might be resolved by future research, but at this point, we have the literature that we have. So my questions for the experts who reviewed studies of animals and mechanisms are really about how strong the animal evidence is. We've heard three different perspectives on it, but I'm kind of looking for the key summary of the strength of the evidence from all of those whose expertise is in that area. Mine is not. I will say I'm not particularly concerned about multiple testing for reasons that I won't get into unless somebody really wants to discuss that. And I don't really have an expectation of monotonic dose response because from what we've seen in the whole body of evidence about BPA is that the effects are often nonlinear. So that's yet another challenge. And then regarding the key characteristics, my question, again, for the people who spent a lot of time with that literature and whose expertise is in that area is, where is there strong evidence in exposed humans, if that exists? So we'll go ahead and open it up to the rest of the committee now. Okay, good. Dr. Lamerrill.
Hello. Prior to the public comments, Dr. Eastman and I were discussing the malignant lymphoma data, and I was able to confirm that in the 103-week feeding study in BPA treated male B6 C3F1 mice, it was not rats, it was mice. In the NTP 1982 study, the incidence of malignant lymphoma alone, as well as the combination of malignant lymphoma and lymphocytic leukemia combined, was significantly increased in the low dose group by pairwise comparison. We also have evidence that the leukemia in the male F30, or excuse me, 344 rats of the NTP 1982 study had a significantly increasing trend of leukemias at 0.02 p-value. Their high dose group pairwise comparison was based on 23 out of 50 leukemias in that high dose group versus 13 out of 50 leukemias in the controls. And in the Clarity study, the male Sprague-Dawley rats of NCTR substrain had 1 granulocytic leukemia observed in each dose group at 2.5, 25, and 25,000 micrograms per kilogram per day of bisphenol A, but not in the others, and that was considered a rare tumor. So we've got 2 independent rat studies and 1 that have leukemia. There was a mouse study with male B6, C3, F1s that had the leukemia is not significant, with 0 out of 44 observed in the control group, 1 leukemia in the 1,000 parts per million group, and 2 leukemias in the 5,000. But that increasing leukemia incidence did not reach significance. So we have 2 independent rat studies for that. And then with respect to the lymphoma study, we have the NCTR rats in the 2-year observation period, also having an increase in malignant lymphoma in the 25 milligram per kilogram group at p-value less than 0.05. And that was a increasing trend that was significant at a p-value of less than 0.01 in the Clarity study. And this is an uncommon neoplasm across SD rat strains. And in addition to that comment I made earlier to clarify about the male B6, C3, F1s having an increased malignant lymphoma. So we have 2 malignant lymphomas, or excuse me, 2 strains or 2 species with malignant lymphomas. The other malignancy that was brought up was the lung metastasis of the mouse mammary cancer model, ERB2, which is highly relevant to human breast cancer as a HER2 positive model. And they found that the 2.5 exposure group for BPA had over 25% of mice with lung metastases, whereas their control looked like it was maybe about 5 or 6% with lung metastases. I'm just summarizing a bar graph that they provided in that Jenkins et al. November 2011 paper. And the BPA 25 dose group also had a percent of lung metastases at over 15%. So in comparison to about 6% or so in the controls. And those 2 dose groups were significantly different from the controls.
Thank you. I'll just go through the other members of the committee in the order in which I see the raised hands on my screen. So Dr. Eastman, you're next. I think you're muted. Can't hear you. Still can't hear you. You're muted.
Unmute. Okay. Can you hear me? I
Now,
lost my
yes.
screen, but basically, so as pointed out, there's a marginal increase in leukemias and lymphomas that occurred at the low dose. In the NTP 1982 study, it was not increased at the higher dose, and it was not a significant trend. So if you look at the abstract of the NTP bioassay, and let me quote, in male mice, there was an increased incidence of leukemias or lymphomas, 2 of 49, 9 of 50, 5 of 50, but this increase was not statistically significant. And then so we can get into more details if you want, but that's essentially, that's what the actually bioassay itself, the abstract says, of the NTP bioassay. And I hope I can get the picture back here somehow. Am I still on? Okay.
Yeah, we see you.
I can't see anyone.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you a question anyway. So
Okay.
In my preliminary remarks, I did allude to numerous observations that many effects of BPA seem to be nonlinear. So does the lack of a statistically significant trend still bother you knowing that?
Actually, it does in this case. The real concern about the nonlinearity of bisphenol A is brought up really in the low dose region, where people are concerned about non-monotonic effects. These are clearly in the high dose region, high and very high. So the fact that you don't have a clear dose response for me is kind of a different subject here entirely, because we're not in that portion of the dose response curve.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, other members of the committee. I don't see any other raised hands. So, any interest in further discussion or questions for the discussants before we move on to a decision?
Dale, I'm going to log off and log back on because I can't see anything at the moment. It's very peculiar.
Okay, we see a couple of hands coming up, Dr. McDonald and then Dr. Mack.
Great. Yeah, one of the public comments by Robin Pruitt sort of reminded me of a comment I wanted to make earlier on the historical controls and the clarity study. I'm really not convinced that we have relevant historical controls for that study, and sort of makes me leery about the whole rare tumor analysis. You know, we had nicely summarized 3 data sets of normative data to compare, and they've really talked about the strengths and limitations, but you know, some of that data is outside the EPA recommended 5-year window. And what's really concerning most to me is that the clarity studies were fully gavage studies. I mean, the dams were dosed by gavage, the early postnatal life, which is really stressful to the young animals, was gavage, as well as gavage through adulthood. However, the historical controls included animals from non-gavage dosing or from studies that had mixed gavage dietary and drinking water. I think it should be noted that FDA in their public comments to this committee also highlighted the quote, inappropriate application of historical control data. I think ACC also commented to this effect. You know, FDA was mostly concerned about genetic background, and they also were really pointed to the differences in the rodent diet. Anyway, I just feel that the rare tumor analysis, at least from the clarity study, should be sort of given less weight towards our clearly shown criteria.
Hi, Dana. Now you're muted.
So I am. Dr. Mack, you're up next.
Actually, I put my hand up just because I want to push Joe Landolf to give us his bottom line. You asked the 3 of them to do so, and I only heard from one.
Very good. Dr. Landolf has his hand up, and you're next. And you're still muted, Dr. Landolf. So if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I read this 600-page document a number of times over, and it's pretty interesting. It reminds me of the way I was trained growing up, you know, as a scientist, and the doggone thing is metabolized, it's glucuronidated, it's metabolized, and epoxides are formed, free radicals are formed, it's genotoxic. Dr. Besseratinia indicated in that section that I also read that the epigenetic effects are occurring. They're very complicated, but they do occur, and that's another route to carcinogenesis. Oxidative stress, Dr. McDonald covered pretty nicely. There's chronic inflammation. So I think this is a very complicated chemical. I think it operates probably through a number of different mechanisms to cause carcinogenesis. I don't think we've by any means settled that yet, but it's got a lot of potentially carcinogenic mechanisms. Yeah, the animal data, there's a couple studies I didn't like because they had high backgrounds, like one had 13 in the controls, but there's also a lot of animal data there that's positive, and some of it is statistically significant for trend tests or pairwise comparisons, et cetera. In fact, I was reading that into the record on purpose to refresh people's memories about the enormous amount of work that the WIHA had done in formulating this document and all the things they had found. And I don't think they operated with a lot of biases. I think they just put things together. I was trying to drag them out and was kind of stopped from doing that. So this looks like a classical chemical that's metabolized by P450. It's glucuronidated. You get oxidative stress. You get a bonus of epigenetic effects. You get some chronic inflammation. So, and I'm going to jump over to a safety issue for one thing. I really don't like the fact this chemical is all over the doggone place. And I think it behooves the chemical industry, and I say this as a chemist, which was my training, to be more responsible in doing environmental impact reports before they put this stuff all over the place. So I'm going to jump back now just to the science. I think this is a carcinogen. I think the animal data is sufficient for us to convict it as a carcinogen. And I think the mechanisms are beginning to become clearer. They're not totally clear yet. So I think that my training tells me I'm going to vote to make this a carcinogen, just for my own personal vote and for my own personal reasons. And it's mutagenic too. So there's a lot of properties about this chemical that are dangerous and can contribute to carcinogenicity as well as the animal data.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Mack, you still have your hand up. Did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I'm not one of the animal people, so perhaps you want to ask Dr. Bush first, but then I have a comment.
Yep, Dr. Bush has his hand up right now, so let's go right over to you.
Yeah, thank you. So I very much appreciate Dr. Landoff and Dr. Lamerle's perspective. I agree. There is something here. There is some convincing data, but when I look at the animal data, I am seeing things that are too inconsistent to warrant a definitive decision on this chemical at this time. I mean, I'm going to remind everyone there is, as the HID document indicated, there's 4,000 hits, 1,300 references. There are no slam dunks here. There is a lot of circumstantial data. How many more studies are going to be necessary to find this as being a carcinogen? I question many of the veracity of many of these animal studies, the clarity study being the piece de resistance, and that was inconclusive as far as I'm concerned. Yes, there are some suggestions of association with some cancers, but in my mind, it doesn't meet the criteria for clearly invasive cancer.
Thank you. Then Dr. Mack, you wanted to say something else after that.
Yeah, speaking as an epidemiologist, I have a couple comments before, which are not directly pertinent to the decision, but I'll make them first. First comment is this stuff is ubiquitous and it's contact sensitive. That means that plastic of the wrong kind being touched has the potential to transmit the agent. So that means that if the agent does have danger, it's likely to be a very widespread danger. Second point is that for breast cancer and for some of the other cancers, it's very clear that early exposure is important. And early exposure to a touch-sensitive agent is perhaps a real problem with children and all the way up through puberty. So I'm especially concerned that we make the right decision about this particular agent. And to me, now that I've said that, again, that's not relevant to the decision because that's not in the line that's required. But to me, given that this stuff is estrogenic, it magnifies estrogens, it affects estrogen receptors and progesterone receptors. And it looks to me from what the animal people have said that there's a real probability that it does, in fact, under some circumstances, cause neoplasm. So my inclination is to say that this should be listed. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Mack. Let's do a quick survey of the rest of the committee, see whether anybody else wants to comment before we proceed to a decision. Dr. Landolf, you still have your hand up. Did you have something else? You're muted, but if you don't have anything else to say, you could just put your hand down.
Let's see. Yeah, I just had a small thing to say. I think Tom and I are fairly close on this issue. I expressed, and I do share his worry about the ubiquity of this material. I think it's probably been made ubiquitous in an irresponsible manner, and I'd like to see this kind of stuff stopped if possible. That's outside the purview of our committee, I understand. But I think Tom and I are on the same page. I think this chemical looks like a carcinogen. It behaves like a carcinogen. It's metabolized and detoxified like a carcinogen would be. It's genotoxic. It's epigenetic, causing epigenetic effects. So I again indicate that I'm fairly close to Tom's position, and I'm going to vote to list it as a carcinogen for all the animal data and the other reasons I just enumerated.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Lamero, your comment.
I just wanted to ask a procedural question of the WEHA staff. I've had the guidance criteria in front of me as I reviewed the literature and had this meeting with you all today. And I was just curious about the part, obviously there's some guidance on how do we look at the quality of a study, which I think have been addressed well. We've talked also about malignancies and of malignant potential. There's a point in the guidance criteria where it suggests that we should look at tumors being found to occur in significant excess in the two genders of a species or in two distinct species. Or in two different experiments carried out in two different laboratories under different protocols. And I'm just curious how that's been applied in the past, and you know, particularly with respect to rodents, and you know, is there a sense in here that if you look at the further language there, it says that a single study in one species might be considered to provide sufficient evidence of carcinogenicity. Another part says evidence of carcinogenicity in animals derived from da, 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 da. So I was wondering, is there a feeling about whether or not something that's an animal carcinogen would be listed as a carcinogen? I'm just curious about the role of the inadequate human versus the animal data / mechanistic data. Thank you.
Would the staff like to answer that question? Maybe Lauren
Why don't I, and, this is, just, I want to start by saying, this criteria was developed by the committee, and has been used by the committee. So it's the committee's criteria that were developed in a committee process. And the committee has already listed a number of chemicals based on animal evidence alone. So that has happened. And I guess what I would, and potentially, I don't know if someone else from OEA wants to raise an issue, but it might make sense to, Dr. Mack was involved in developing these criteria. So with respect to some of the points you raised, Michelle, I wonder if Dr. Mack would like to weigh in.
My computer is not working well, so I can't raise my hand. But you wanted me to comment on her question?
Yes.
Yeah, particularly the animal. Mhm.
Well, first of all, the animal description of the two species, two sexes, good studies, rare tumors, those aspects are all pretty standard. And Joe, I think, played a role in revising anything that I wrote with respect to the criteria. With respect to the no human, but only animal, if this was written with the recognition that human data is, first of all, very difficult to get, and epidemiologic data is always suspect. And it takes a really lucky circumstance to be able to get completely convincing human data. Second of all, the actual wording of the Proposition 65 did not refer to humans. It said causes cancer. And we've judged several different compounds to be carcinogenic tentatively without any good human data, for the obvious reason that there was none and would not be any, but the animal data was very convincing. So in this case, the animal data is not terribly convincing, but it exists. And in light of the other circumstances, especially the carcinogen, the carcinogen criteria, I don't have any problem with what I told you before. That answer your question, Lauren?
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Mack. That's very helpful. Dr. McDonald, one more comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a real quick point. Put my hand up when I heard about the ubiquity comment. I don't think it's been said today, but bisphenol A already appears on the Prop 65 list for repro and development. So I just want to make it clear that this should be focused on the cancer and not whether it or not it should be listed.
Thank you. Now, are there any members of the committee who haven't spoken yet, who have a comment or a question before we move to vote? Dr. Wong.
So I hate to bring us back, but can someone from the OEHA staff just remind me why the clarity data were reanalyzed? I mean, I know that there was a comment made that some studies were reanalyzed. I mean, it still bothers me a little that the different results are presented from the original report. I mean, there are a number of points made in the FDA document that it would be helpful for me to hear, somewhat a summary of a rebuttal.
Dr. Loomis, if it's okay, I can say a few words.
Yeah, please do.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Wang, for the comment. I can say a few things regarding the FDA comment, and our biostatistician can chime in as well. I just want to clarify regarding the historical control critique the FDA comment gave us. They pointed out that the Charles Rivers and the NDB, the 2 second databases are inappropriate to be used. It seems that they prefer the NDB 2008 and 2010 database, whereas in fact in our document, we use a more stringent criteria. So the rare tumor needs to fulfill the criteria for all 3 of these databases to be considered rare. So rare tumor is defined as less than 1% occurrence, and we only presented those that are not seen in concurrent controls. So that's the point. And regarding the statistical tests that OEHA performed and how they're different from the NTP and NCTR reports, I'd like to ask Rose Schmitz to say a few words. But I'll start by saying that it is OEHA's practice to use defective number when they're available. And in all the past HIDs, we would do this analysis when the data are available to us. So Ms. Schmitz, are you available to talk?
Sure. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so as Dr. Sun pointed out, so one reason why there might be a discrepancy between the, say, a p-value or, you know, some significant result in what's presented in the hazard identification document versus in the report is that we use effective number when we can. So we're actually looking at the original animal data and taking into consideration when each tumor of that type was first observed and what animals were actually alive at the time of the first occurrence of the tumor and what animals were examined at the site. You know, for various reasons, sometimes a tissue can't be examined. And so those animals would also be excluded from the denominator, as would animals who didn't survive until the occurrence of the first tumor. So I think, does that answer your question about why the results may be a little bit different?
Does that answer your
Can I
question?
ask Rose just a clarifying question on her last point? Rose, when you said that you also exclude animals that didn't have survive until the first tumor, do you mean an animal that died at a tumor-free state, or do you mean in the cohort, like if the whole cohort's incident-free?
Yeah, so we look at for each tumor site. So suppose we're looking at you know, lymphoma in male rats or something, or in one experiment, we're going to look at when the tumor was first observed in any dose group within that experiment, and then any animal at any dose group who didn't survive until the first occurrence of that tumor would be removed from the denominator. Does that make sense?
Does that answer the questions? Hearing no further comment, we have entered our last hour, so we do need to move along. And so with that in mind, I want to see if any member of the committee is not prepared to vote now and needs more discussion before we move on. If you feel like we need to talk about it some more, please speak up or raise your hand. Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay, I'm not seeing a request for further discussion, so let's proceed to vote on the listing decision. So the question before the committee is specifically this: has bisphenol A been clearly shown through scientifically valid testing according to generally accepted principles to cause cancer? So I'll now call on each member of the committee to vote, and we'll record your votes. So we're going in alphabetical order. Dr. Besantinia, how do you vote? Can't hear you.
I'm sorry, I said my vote is no.
Dr. Bush,
Quick comment. I very much want to say yes. I don't work for the plastics industry. I appreciate what Dr. Landoff and Dr. Mack have said. My concern is that this does not meet the scientific threshold. No other authoritative body has indicated that BPA is a carcinogen. Our own FDA says that it isn't. My vote is no because of that.
Dr. Crispy, how do you vote?
My vote is also no, and Dr. Bush summarized what my sentiments and my thoughts are. I just feel like it's not seeing the threshold of clearly shown, evidence clearly showing, and yeah, so I'll leave it there.
Dr. Eastman, your vote, please.
Yeah. My comments are similar to those of Dr. Bush and Dr. Crespi. No. I just don't think sufficient evidence yet.
Yeah. Dr. Lamero,
Yes.
Dr. Landolf,
Yes, for all the reasons I already enumerated.
okay, Dr. Loomis votes no for reasons similar to those articulated by Dr. Bush. And I will say I am concerned about this ubiquitous chemical, but I just don't think the data are there to list it at this point. Dr. Mack,
Yes.
Dr. McDonald,
Vote no for the same reasons stated earlier.
Dr. Stern,
I'm gonna say yes for the reasons Dr. Mack and Landolf explained. I understand the concern that is not a clear, the evidence is not clear as for other carcinogens, but I think the key characteristics are convincing. And even though the epidemiological data is not as informative as we want it to be, I'm concerned about the couple of studies that were well done and report the positive association. I think with more time, we'll see that more of those may show up. So I'm concerned about this.
Dr. Wong, your vote, please.
I'm going to say yes, mostly because I'm convinced by the mechanistic data, and I don't think it needs to satisfy every single component. And I don't want there to be sufficient human data before we make a decision.
Okay, thank you. The committee has voted, and as I counted, there were 5 yes votes. So that is not enough to add the chemical to the list. That would require 6 votes, and I'll ask Dr. Gilson or whoever on staff is counting votes to verify what I've just said.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so BPA won't be added to the list at this time. However, given the concerns of the committee and comments that have been made about the current state of the evidence, I can imagine this one coming back at some future time as evidence continues to accumulate. So we'll move on to the next item. That is the consent item, update on the California Code of Regulations, Title 27, Section 27,000, a list of chemicals which have not been adequately tested as required. So this is one of the duties of the committee to review this question and to affirm the changes in response to submissions to the Department of Pesticide Regulation. Excuse me, US EPA has indicated there are no changes. This is basically a ministerial duty of the committee in that we rely on information provided to OEHA by the Department of Pesticide Regulation and the US EPA in order to identify the chemicals that need to be added or removed to this section 27000 list. And so at this stage, I'll invite Julian Lichty to give the staff presentation on this item.
All right, so thank you for that, Dr. Loomis. Proposition 65 requires the state to publish and update annually a list of chemicals that are required to be tested under state or federal law for carcinogenicity or reproductive toxicity, and that have not yet been adequately tested as required. This can be found in Title 27, Section 27,000 of the California Code of Regulations, and is commonly referred to as the Section 27,000 list, separate and distinct from the Proposition 65 list of chemicals known to cause cancer or reproductive toxicity. The Section 27,000 list has no regulatory impact. It does not require that any testing be done. Rather, it's a source of information concerning chemicals that need further testing pursuant to state or federal law. To update the list, OEHA requests information from the California Department of Pesticide Regulation and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Pollution Prevention and Toxics and Office of Pesticide Programs each year. This year, OEHA staff reviewed these responses and identified one recommended change to the Section 27,000 list, removal of bromadiolone. Based on information received from DPR, data requirements for this compound have been fulfilled, and further carcinogenicity and reproductive toxicity testing are not required. The letter from DPR, along with additional background response letters from US EPA, a mock-up of the proposed change, are all available in the staff report provided to the committee and posted online. The proposed change is also shown on this slide. As Dr. Loomis mentioned, this is a consent item and a ministerial duty of the committee, and that the CIC and DART-IC use the information provided by DPR and US EPA to identify the chemicals that need to be added to or removed from the Section 27,000 list. We ask the committee members to vote in favor of the proposed change so we can update the list. And I'll now turn it back to Dr. Loomis for the vote.
Okay, so this is a consent item. If there are any clarifying questions, we can take those now. Not seeing any, so we'll proceed to a vote. This does require a roll call vote. So the question we're voting on is, should Section 27,000 of the Title 27 of the California Code of Regulations be amended as indicated in the report? So again, we'll go through the committee members in alphabetical order. Dr. Besantinia. Can't hear you if you're speaking.
I'm sorry, is there an abstinent vote for this?
I couldn't hear your question, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. Is there an abstinent vote on this? I'm assuming that it would amount to a no.
You can abstain if you wish, or vote no. You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I haven't had the chance to read this, so study this, so I'm not going to vote on this.
Okay, so you're abstaining, is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
Dr. Bush.
Yes.
Dr. Crespi.
Yes.
Dr. Eastman.
Yes.
Dr. Lamero.
Yes.
Dr. Landolf. Don't hear you. Dr. O'Neill.
Yes.
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 Thanks, got it. Loomis votes yes. Dr. Mack.
Yes.
Dr. McDonald.
Yes.
Dr. Stern.
Yes.
And Dr. Wong.
Yes.
Okay. So we have more than 6 yes votes. So the change is affirmed. Okay. Assuming the staff agrees with my tally of the votes, we'll move on to staff updates. The next item is an update of the proposition listings, regulations, and litigation that have taken place since the last meeting of the committee. And again, Julian Lichty will present this.
Thank you. So I'll be providing an update on Proposition 65 development since the last CIC meeting. I'll start by going over the chemicals or endpoints added to the Proposition 65 list or under consideration for potential listing, as well as data call-ins requesting information on chemical toxicity. Then I'll review adopted and proposed safe harbor levels. After that, I'll turn it over to our Chief Counsel, Carolyn Rowan, to provide an update on other regulatory actions and significant Proposition 65 litigation. Next slide, please. Since the committee's last meeting, 5 chemicals have been added to the Proposition 65 list. PFNA and its salts were added as reproductive toxicants, and trimethylpropane triacrylate, technical grade, tetrahydrofuran, methylacrylate, and 2-ethylhexylacrylate were added as carcinogens. Additionally, the cancer endpoint has been added for the following chemicals previously listed for reproductive toxicity: perfluorooctane sulfonic acid and its salts and transformation and degradation precursors following the committee's decision last year, and perfluorooctanoic acid, BPA. Next slide, please. 4 potential cancer listings are under consideration: antimony trivalent compounds, 1-bromo-3-chloropropane, 1-butyl glycetyl ether, and glycetyl methacrylate are under consideration for listing administratively under the Labor Code mechanism. The DART-IC's, anyway. And next, the DART-IC's 2022 meeting was held in October and consisted of a workshop on zebrafish data and development and reproductive toxicity health hazard assessment. No listing decisions were considered. Early in the year, OEHA issued a data call-in on bisphenol S to request information related to its reproductive toxicity. This information is used in the preparation of a hazard identification document. Next slide, please. Since the committee's last meeting, cancer no significant risk levels were adopted for oral and inhalation exposures to 1,3-dichloropropene, 1,3-D, and became effective October 1st, 2022. OEHA also proposed a no significant risk level for antimony trioxide and is reviewing comments received on the proposal. And with that, I'll turn things over to Carolyn.
Thanks, Julian. And hello again. I have a few updates on Proposition 65 regulations and litigation. Since the committee last met, OEHA has adopted a number of new safe harbor warning regulations. The safe harbor warnings for cannabis smoke and Delta-9 THC exposure became effective on October 1, 2022. Those regulations provide non-mandatory specific safe harbor exposure warning methods and content for retail products that can expose consumers to cannabis smoke or Delta-9 THC via inhalation, ingestion, or dermal application. And also for environmental exposures to cannabis smoke and Delta-9 THC businesses where smoking of cannabis or vaping or dabbing of Delta-9 THC occurs. The content identifies the chemical route of exposure and provides specific information to consumers about the risk of using cannabis products, including cancer, and while pregnant, the impact exposures can have on an unborn child. OEHA has also adopted a new safe harbor warning for glyphosate. That regulation provides safe harbor guidance for businesses that cause exposures to glyphosate from consumer products that require a warning. The warning language reflects the range of opinion by authorities on the carcinogenicity of glyphosate. It was approved on September 1 and will become effective the first of the year. OEHA has also adopted a new safe harbor warning for acrylamide in food, and that regulation provides safe harbor warning content for businesses that cause exposures to Proposition 65 listed chemicals in foods and beverages that require warnings. OAL approved that regulation on October 26th, and it will become effective the first of the year as well. Also on November 3rd, OEHA resubmitted a final regulatory package to the Office of Administrative Law for a proposed regulation regarding exposures to acrylamide in cooked and heat processed foods. This regulation provides that a manufacturer of a food does not expose an individual to acrylamide within the meaning of Proposition 65 if the manufacturer reduced the levels of acrylamide to the lowest level currently feasible, as defined in the proposed reg. It also sets forth concentration levels in foods that are deemed to comply, and OAL is currently reviewing the final package. Any questions on those regulation updates? Okay, next slide, please. I also have a few litigation updates for you. First, the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine versus Newsom case. This is a challenge to OEHA's decision not to list processed meats, and we're in the discovery stage right now. Oh, I think I see a hand there. Dr. Eastman, did you have a question?
Probably more relevant after you finish this part.
Okay. So as I was saying, we're in the discovery stage right now for the PCRM versus Newsom case. There's also the National Association of Wheat Growers versus Bonta litigation. That case involves a First Amendment challenge to the glyphosate warning requirement. The challenge centers on the argument that because only the IARC has identified the chemical as a carcinogen, and other agencies, including US EPA, have said it is unlikely to be a human carcinogen, there can be no warning that would not be misleading. The district court determined that required warnings for glyphosate exposures violated the First Amendment, limits on compelled speech, and the Attorney General's office appealed that to the Ninth Circuit. The case was on hold while OEHA prepared a new regulation. And now that OEHA's new regulation is final, the parties recently filed supplemental briefs in the Ninth Circuit addressing the adoption of that new reg. So now the court will decide whether to send the matter back to the district court or proceed to oral argument. There's also the Cal Chamber versus Bonta case, which involves another First Amendment challenge, which in that case is a challenge to the safe harbor warning for acrylamide. The district court previously granted a preliminary injunction and the Ninth Circuit affirmed. That case is back with the trial court now. Although there's been little activity since a new judge was assigned, the Attorney General's office recently filed a notice informing the court of our new acrylamide warning regulation. And finally, in the Council for Education and Research on Toxics versus Starbucks case, this is the case where CERT challenged the OEHA regulation on coffee as part of a long-running enforcement action. Recently, the case was argued in September, and last month, the Court of Appeal issued a decision affirming the trial court's decision upholding the coffee regulation. CERT recently filed a petition for review with the California Supreme Court, so we'll see what happens with that. And those are my updates on significant Proposition 65 litigation. Dr. Eastman, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did it as well. It's more of a housekeeping thing, but over the last 10 years or so, we've been asked to hang on to various documents related to various litigation. We never seem to be told when we can get rid of them. It would be helpful if you could let us know which ones we need to still hold on to and which ones we can throw away. I mean, you can send it out later because I know this is not off the top of your head, but it would be useful to at some point be able to get rid of some of these.
Sure. Yeah, I'd have to check the litigation hold list, but we can provide you an update on that.
Looks like there's another question.
Can I ask a quick question out of curiosity? I just want to see what was the ruling on the fourth item regarding the warning for acrylamide for coffee, and I see that it was against Starbucks, and how is it going to affect other franchises?
So the ruling in that case, the CERT versus Starbucks case, upheld OEHA's coffee regulation. So OEHA had adopted a regulation essentially saying that chemicals formed in coffee from the roasting and brewing process don't require a warning under Proposition 65 because of special circumstances related to the chemical mixture of the coffee. So that was upheld in this Court of Appeal decision. So that would mean that warnings are not required.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any more questions?
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Julian. We'll move to the last agenda item then and go back to Director Lauren Zeiss. But before we do that, I would just like to thank Lauren and the entire OEHA staff for a really Herculean effort to put together all of the vast material for this meeting. It's was a huge job, and they've really done admirably with that. And I see members of the committee nodding and clapping their hands. So thanks to all of you for really great background work. So Lauren, your turn to summarize what we've done and wrap up the meeting.
Okay. All right, so the committee considered at length and deliberated at length on whether to add bisphenol A to the Proposition 65 list as a carcinogen. By a vote of 5 yes and 6 no, the committee declined to list bisphenol A. The committee also voted on a consent item, and they voted to remove bromadiolone from the Section 2700 list that's published in the California Code of Regulations. The vote was 10 yes, 1 abstention, and so the chemical will be removed from that list. So I think I want to meet Dana's thanks and acknowledgement for the extensive work that the committee did to prepare for this meeting. It was a huge document, very complex, took a lot of time and effort, I'm sure, to work through this document. And it was pretty obvious that the committee prepared and considered it very carefully. So we really appreciate your effort on that. And of course, I want to add my thanks to the staff for all of their work to put that document together, and also to the audience and commenters today. We do have a final item, and that is that Dr. Thomas Mack has informed us of his intention to resign from the Carcinogen Identification Committee after his 30 years of service as chair of the committee. So tremendous service to the people of California. I'm going to try not to get choked up. Dr. Mack came to the committee early in 1993. He began as chair of the CIC. So this is Dr. Mack's last meeting. And I thought we wanted to step back and take some time for the committee members to express their thanks to Dr. Mack and that wish to, and that have, wish him well, and also for staff at OEHA. I thought maybe a little history lesson first, and that's that the governor's, the Proposition 65 statute places the responsibility of the governor on the governor to cause the Proposition 65 list to be published. And as you all know, you're all appointed by the governor. And originally, under the Duke-Majan administration, when we started this, there was one committee. It was called the Scientific Advisory Panel, the SAP. And they considered whether to put carcinogens on the list and also developmental and reproductive toxicants. So we had that committee Proposition 65 is kind of a complex, very complex. The evidence continues to become more complex. And so under the Wilson administration, the decision was made to make two committees, the Carcinogen Identification Committee and the Developmental and Reproductive Toxicant Identification Committee. So we have two committees to add chemicals to the list. So early in 1993, the question was, well, you know, with all the attention on Proposition 65 and a number of things that were going on in the background, it was really important to get esteemed committees together. And of course, this committee has continued in that. So we were looking for a chair for the committee. And, you know, Dr. Mack had been part of a lot of work at IARC, the Supplement 7, which basically did a lot of considered, I can't remember how many carcinogens, but looking at a large number of carcinogens. And Dr. Mack was a rapporteur for some of the IARC monographs, and he had created this LA Cancer Registry and also the registry, International Registry and California Registry of Twins to study chronic diseases, and had a tremendous notoriety in publication records. So we asked Dr. Mack, and so and he agreed. I remember the meeting with Dr. Mack very well, because I had not much before that point in time given birth to my son, and I brought him down to LA, and he stayed with my parents, and I went to meet Dr. Mack, and he's now 30. We just celebrated his 30th birthday. So anyway, Dr. Mack agreed, you know, esteemed physician and epidemiologist. So he served under 5 governors. He's, you know, Pete Wilson, Gray Davis, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jerry Brown, and Gavin Newsom. So all 5 governors. And I think it's a testimony to Dr. Mack's skill and brilliance as a chair and epidemiologist, to have been able to span as chair of the CIC, all those different administrations. So, you know, and all the while, also, we all now see how much work this committee can be ahead of a meeting. And of course, Dr. Mack has had this very esteemed career at USC as well. So I think I can speak on behalf of this administration, California EPA and OEHA, and thanking you, Dr. Mack, for your long service to the state and as chair of this committee. So just thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And yeah. And so I think I'll turn it over to Dana, and you want to facilitate the committee. I know a couple of staff have something to say as well, and maybe Dr. Mack wants to close.
Thank you from the committee. It's been a real honor and pleasure to chair the committee for 30 years. And I must say I've learned a great deal, not only from my fellow committee members, but from the regulated community and from the staff. And I guess I should say that I've heard so many plaudits for the document that the staff prepared for this meeting. And I just want to say that it's not unusual. Every single meeting has an incredibly detailed and accurate document to start out with. And it always amazes me how much better the staff from the average epidemiologic study staff, because one would think that getting a secure job with the state might make some concessions to quality, but if anything, it's the other way around. So I want to thank the OEHA staff for 30 years worth of staff excellence. And of course, Joe, for example, has been there for 30 years as well. It's not only me. And I certainly have grown to appreciate the help of Joe and of David and of other members of the staff over the years. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Mack. I know some other members of the committee and perhaps of the staff would like to comment. And I'm going to use my seat as acting chair to start that off. And I'll just say, first of all, that doing anything for 30 years is a really impressive accomplishment, especially in a political environment like this. Surviving 5 different governors of both parties is quite a feat. It's been my honor to be acting chair for a couple of recent meetings. And I would just say that this public function of running the meeting is really only a small part of what the chair does, and has certainly given me an appreciation of the labor that Dr. Mack has devoted to this process for 30 years. I'm grateful for that and honored to have been able to help you. So I invite other members of the committee and the staff to
Thank you, Dr.
wish to do so. Okay, Dr. McDonald, you're first.
Yeah, thank you. As some of you may know, I started my professional career as a toxicologist at OEHA in 1994 through 2005. I proudly served in the cancer unit working on Prop 65 issues and children's health guidance. I must admit, my time at OEHA seems very long time ago, yet even then, Dr. Mack was the CIC member and chair. And so as you write the hazard ID documents, sometimes I feel I would view you as my audience for writing them even back then. And so I just recall from that time that you always ran a very good and tight meeting. And I truly find it amazing you've served so long and so well in this committee. So Dr. Mack, thank you for your long service to the people of California.
Dr. Landolf, you have your hand
Thank
up.
you, Tom.
Let's see, can you hear me? Not yet.
Yes.
No. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure serving with you, Tom. We both joined the committee about the same time, and we both survived 5 governors. And I'd have to say, Tom is a fantastically scientifically accomplished person, a superb epidemiologist. He can talk to basic scientists, no problem. He's taught me some significant epidemiology. I hope I've shared some basic science with him. Tom is fantastically honest, polite, fair, and open-minded. He always runs the committee. He has run it by making sure everybody has a chance to get their say in. And he taught me very early on, you don't need to know a mechanism of carcinogenesis to put a chemical on a Proposition 65 list. You just need to know that it does cause tumors in animals or in humans, and you can find the other mechanistic data out later. So Tom, I've always enjoyed your fair and even-handed manner of running the committee, your politeness and letting everybody have their say. And I think I've only seen you get mad twice in 30 years. And that was mild madness, not you were irked, not really fuming mad, which I would have gotten in those circumstances. So thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure being a colleague and a member of the committee with you. And it's been a pleasure working with you.
Thanks. Thanks, Dave Eastman. You're next on my screen.
Well, Tom, just want to say thank you very much for your leadership, your collegiality, your friendship over the years. We'll miss seeing you at these meetings, but we hope you are doing other enjoyable things. Anyway, thanks again.
Thank you. On to Dr. Wong. You're next on my screen.
Well, I just want to say I'm really bummed that this is my first Dr. Mack class. meeting. So, but I do want to thank you, Dr. Mack. I met you about, gosh, just over 20 years ago. And through our collective work in lymphoma, I've gotten to know you, but of course I knew about you before I joined the National Cancer Institute. And, you know, I think for speaking for us epidemiologists, I think when you see the name Dr. Mack, you sort of consider that as your Northern Star when it comes to epidemiologic methods. So I just want to really thank you for the influence you've had in our discipline. And I hopefully look forward to seeing you in Los Angeles and continuing to do some work in lymphoma. But I want to thank you and really let you know how much we sincerely respect you as a person. You're just such a nice person, and especially your academic integrity. So thank you.
Dr.
Thank you,
Bush.
Cynthia.
Thank you, Tom, for your leadership over the last 10 years that I've been on the committee. It's been a pleasure serving with you. My only regret is that we can't be in person doing this, so I can shake your hand and give you a hug. Thank you for your service.
Dr. Stern.
Yes, I want to thank Tom for your years of service and share with the group that not only he started the cancer registry at USC and he's been there for 30 years or more too, but he also is one of the founding members of our department, the department where I am. So it's an immense honor for me to be able to serve in this committee together with you, Tom. I have learned a lot from your comments here, and I just hope that moving forward, now that I'm the only epidemiologist from USC left in the committee, that I can represent as well.
Dr. Becentinio.
Yeah, I would like to echo what
Thank
Dr.
you,
Stern just.
Mariana. I hope Argentina does well in the next couple of days.
I hope so too.
Yeah, as I was just saying, I'd like to echo what Dr. Stern just said. I haven't had the pleasure of working with Tom on this committee, but I am privileged to work at USC at the same department where Dr. Mack is. I haven't directly collaborated with him, but I have been working with his trainees who are pioneers in the field, which just tells you what a trailblazer he has been. And all they say about Tom is the greatest of the great thing. And I would appreciate his contribution and work, not only to this committee, but also the work that he has done and continues to do at USC. Thank you, Tom.
And Dr. Romero.
Tom, I feel like I've had a great pleasure in joining this committee under your leadership and really got to understand what it means to be a good leader of such an important endeavor, and also how the process works through your role here. And I'm really honored that we had time to overlap, and I wish you all the best in what you do next. So thank you very much.
Vincent.
Thank you, Dana. I'd like to highlight the contribution Dr. Mack makes to this committee of experts by virtue of his international stature and reputation. A quarter century ago, while working at the other side of the country at the US CPA, I became acquainted with Dr. Mack as a national expert on a variety of topics. We interacted on PCBs, at a saccharin workshop, and on other topics. So I'd like to say, Dr. Mack, your grand stature has enhanced the credibility and the reputation of the Proposition 65 program, and you've guided it in the compilation of the most comprehensive list of known and suspected chemical carcinogens. And this is an important scientific research for the state and the entire nation. Thank you, Dr. Mack.
Thanks, Vincent. Martha?
Yes, so as similar to Tom, I started in 1994, and that's when I met Dr. Mack as chair of the CIC. It's been a pleasure. I want to thank you, Dr. Mack, for your many years of service to the people of California as a member of the committee, and I also wish to thank you for your steady leadership over the years in your role as chair of the committee. Dr. Mack has a no-nonsense style, and he's always kept the committee on track and focused on the issues related to hazard identification at each of their meetings. He also runs those meetings very efficiently, making sure that we got through all the agenda items, even if, as it did happen occasionally, we had to delay or shorten or even sometimes even skip taking lunch. So to sum up, I want to recognize Dr. Mack's significant scientific expertise and experience, particularly in the area of cancer hazard identification, which has been invaluable to the scientific work of the committee. Thank you, Dr. Mack.
Thanks, Martha. Are there any other members of staff who'd like to comment before we close? All right, I don't see any. Are there any other issues we should talk about before adjourning the meeting? Lauren, members of the committee, anything?
No, just underscoring, it's just been such a pleasure working with Dr. Mack over all these years, and we really wish him the
Let me
best.
just say thank you to everybody who commented. I don't know if I'm worthy of all those nice remarks, but it's certainly nice to hear them for the time being. Bye-bye.
Bye. Yes.
Thank you for your years of service. Really appreciate it. Hearing nothing else, I think we can adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for really thoughtful discussion today on a particularly challenging topic. Great work.
Happy holidays to all.
Yes, happy holidays.
Christmas.
To all of you, thank you.
Happy holidays.
Bye-bye.
I'm guessing this is the longest meeting we've ever had, but I'm not sure, but I'm guessing.
We'll check the record.
Anyway, thanks,
It
everyone.
was good work. It was, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Loomis, for chairing.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Dr. Loomis, for sharing.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much. Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.